Can you all hear me? Okay. Thank you for attending tonight. I'm so pleased to have been invited back to San Jacinto to do a presentation. I researched this book here over 20 years ago, I suppose now, and it hasn't been told. I haven't done a presentation on it in quite some time, so when I was asked, I thought it was most appropriate to present this, since the Hill family created this monument. They were part of Houston Pipeline Company, and this boy would have been their great uncle. And so a man named Raymond Hill helped me with the research and showed me his family's connections to Mexico, which were very deep-rooted, mostly because of this story. And he and his brother grew up in parts of Mexico, and they were big into falconry. And anyway, they both lived here, and Raymond became an attorney, but had so many interesting artifacts in his house from the Republic era, and that's, I think, rather unusual. Most people don't have a lot of Republic era material. A lot of it's gone by the wayside. He had a really interesting locket that was made out of a pecan shell. It was just a beautiful thing he had in his house. And then he also had materials that came from the empire of Maximilian von Habsburg of Mexico, which at the time I didn't know I was going to be writing that book, but indeed it happened. And so much of a lot of book projects lead to another because you find some nugget in the research that leads you to the next book. And in fact, I'm now at the Whitty working on about 4 different books. I was telling Lisa the next one will be on, it's called From the Alamo to the Astrodome, Historic Preservation in Texas. So that'll be one, and then I'm doing a big book on the Kennedy family of South Texas. So that'll be out in a couple of years, hopefully, if all goes well. So I came across this story. I published a book on, it encompassed my own family's materials. Our family goes back to the Spanish colonial era from 1748 when we were Spaniards, and then McAllen married in. And I grew up on a land grant. It's the oldest ranch in Texas held by one family. So our ranch is nearly 225 years old. And nothing has changed hardly at all. It's very anachronistic. My grandmother was a historian, taught me how to deal with materials and taught me a love for history, especially because we had like one TV station in the country that wasn't always on. And so we read a lot, and we were encouraged when we weren't out working cattle, we read, and she'd teach me things. We're a very project-oriented family, so it's sort of a challenge. But anyway, after I Would Rather Sleep in Texas, which is a book she started and could not complete, which ranged up until 1917 when the border finally got protection. A friend of mine down the road at another ranch, Enrique Guerra was his name, sent me his version of a manuscript of this boy soldier and John C.C. Hill, and it was written by a woman named Fanny Gooch Eigelhart, who I think she fictionalized it a bit, but he said, let's not let this story die. And her book had been written, I think, in around 1920-something. She worked for the San Antonio School District. So he sent me a photocopy of her book, and I didn't have one. I do now, but so it got me thinking about redoing the book and actually making it a history with footnotes and documentation. So can we start the slides, turn on? How do I turn it on? I hit advance. Oh, there we go. So I got down to studying the Hill family, and there was a woman in she was in a retirement home in Waco, and she had this miniature painting, and she said, "I'm pretty sure this is John C.C. Hill." And so I started getting more into it. One thing led to another. I started meeting all the Hill family members, and the book kind of started coming together in my head. And and I'll just tell you what's great about this book, I think, is that a lot of people assume that the Texas Revolution or Republic story was over with San Jacinto battle, which is not true. Texas was beaten up for the next 9 years until they, and here I have all these raids on San Antonio. And so over these next 9 years, there was the Grass War, the Battle of Lipantitlan, raids, the Runaway Scrape, all of these battles, until Texas could not afford or figure out how to defend itself. So they abdicated the Republic to James K. Polk, who said, "We will assume the boundary conflict," because Santa Anna, as you probably know, didn't honor the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. He said, "No, he got back to Mexico and he said, I never signed that." So there was, determined that there was, and this part and parcel was part of the whole Andrew Jackson, James K. Polk push to, for manifest destiny. And there was still turmoil in California and Oregon with England over their territorial sovereignty. So a lot had gone on around the United States for this push to the West, and this was just part of it, and it fit right in with, and in fact, a lot of these same soldiers who ended up coming down and fighting the Mexican War were transplanted from Florida during the Second Seminole War, which was our longest war and our least successful war in the United States. So they just took the whole, 80% of the U.S. Army and plopped them down in Corpus, and that began the war. But this is about the time between that, between those 9 years. So there had been all these attacks on Texas and Lipantitlan, especially in the area around San Antonio. And so a call went out, and this is in 1842, to rally against the Mexicans. And so the Hill family at that time lived in Schulenburg, or in Hillsborough, and they were farmers. And but this call went out. The Texas Safety Commission, which is today the Rangers, went out and had a call to arms. We're going to go and meet them at the border, and we're going to retaliate against these attacks that have been taking place. So they all reconnoitered at Mission San Jose. If you've ever been there, it's the mother of all the missions in San Antonio. And they gather goods and they take off. The Somerville expedition was one of that. It was kind of a disjointed effort marching south, but they ended up at Laredo, and they ended up meeting part of the Mexican army at the Rio Grande, and they ended up attacking that flotilla, burning their ships, and then going on south to the little town of Mier. Mier is across from roughly the town of Camargo, across from Rio Grande City in that area. And Mier is a beautiful little town. It's preserved by benevolent neglect. It's a pretty town, and nobody really goes there because of border violence and cartels and what have you. But it is caught in time. It's very much a Spanish colonial village. So they go down river, and at the same time, here comes Pedro Ampudia, who is a Cuban transplant to Mexico, soldier of fortune. And they meet at Mier, and they start cannonades, fighting. So John C. Hill's father and brother decided, Raymond Monroe and James, decided to take little Raymond with them. And he was only he turned 14 on the journey. And his mother said, no, you're not going. And the father said, you might as well let him cut the apron strings now. Because the father had just sent him alone to Austin on horseback with filing some papers with the Land Commission, if you can believe that. And so he had come back after a terrifying journey, but he leaves with his father. And so they go on down. So the little boys, there were a couple on the mission. This is on Christmas Day, 1842. The boys are pushed up into the flat-roofed plaza area. As you probably know, in Mexico, they would build their roofs flat, and those were called azoteas. And so they climb up on the azoteas. They are meant to guard the cannons that were manned by the Texans. And so he starts picking off. John C. Hill was a very good shot, and he starts picking off Mexican soldiers that would get near the cannons to steal them. And so eventually the army runs out of ammunition, runs out of food. They're freezing cold, and Ampudia goes ahead and takes the town of Mier. And he meets, and in fact, his brother had been wounded. His father seemed okay. But Ampudia said, who are you, and why are you so small and here, and you did such deadly work with my battery? And he said, and he kind of broke down into tears, little John C. Hill, and he says, and so Ampudia says, Mijito, do not fear, I will do you no harm. Have the Texans have so few men that they must take their little ones into battle? He said, I'm no little one, I'm 14 years old. 1,000 apologies, senor, I did not know it's such a manly age. What is your name, hijito mío? John Christopher Columbus Hill. Juan Cristobal Colon Hill. And what did you expect to discover in Mexico? I came to fight. Have you no father? Yes, he's out there with my brother Jeff. Sorry, I said his name was James. It's Jeff. Now, how is it that when you have a father and brother to send to war, you did not stay home with my mother, your mother? Sir, I should have stayed home with my mother. I've killed 12 of your men today, and I came to take care of my father and Jeffrey. So he's kind of separated away and held back with the other little boys. And the men are then sent. Have y'all heard of the Black Bean Incident in Texas history? It's where the men were recruited or cornered, and they are marched down from Matamoros. They were marched to Matamoros at first. Then they take off west, and they end up at the town of Saltillo, where they're put into, it's sort of a carriage, what would you call it, a wagon stop, kind of a hotel, stage stop. And it was disgusting, run down. It was a makeshift jail. And they break out of their jail, and Bigfoot Wallace sort of handles some of the breaking out, and Thomas Green and some of the others. And while they go this way, the boys are taken on the more salubrious route down along the water. This is in the desert. This is along the water. And so they're taken via Tampico to Mexico City. So the men arrive at, first John C. Hill arrives in Mexico City, while his father and brother are being marched to Saltillo. He is immediately taken to the Archbishop of Mexico City, and he's told, you're going to live here a while, but President Santa Anna wants to adopt you. And he's like, I can't be adopted. I mean, these were like Martians to him. I mean, like aliens. And while Santa Ana had an interest in the boy, he was good looking, he already knew some Spanish, he knew that he wouldn't take arms up against his fellow Texans, for Santa Ana had plans for Texas. And so he sends him to the Archbishop's residence. And the Archbishop tells him, I'm going to baptize you. And he's like, what? Baptize me? I'm already, I think he was a Baptist. And he says, the president told me you're coming, but I'm going to take care of you for a while. And he said, and the Archbishop suggested that John convert to the Catholic faith and to kneel as the friars passed with the host. And he says, I don't know anything about this. And the Archbishop says, why do you fail to make your devotions? As though he knew these things when the friars would pass with the host. And Archbishop explained the philosophies behind Catholicism and urged John to be baptized again in the true church. I'll appoint a time very soon for you to be baptized. Baptized? Well, when I was an infant, I was baptized in the Methodist Church, and I'm still a member of that church. It's a church of my parents and all my people, Your Reverence, and I don't see how I could leave it. And so Posada y Garduño says, that is no church at all. Why do you not know all who do not belong to the true church will be cast into eternal punishment? This was powerful news to him. He said, I don't see how God could be so unjust as to shut out of heaven such good people as my mother and the rest of my folks. If they can't go to heaven, I'll go where they go, and it'll be a good place if my mother's there. So they agreed to stop quarreling, and he settled into education and religious education as well under the Archbishop. And so meanwhile, the men are there, they escape this, well, in quote, makeshift prison of Salado. They're all recaptured pretty much because they got away with their horses. They were eating their horses. It was the desert, it was dry, there was nothing to eat. They were recaptured, and Santa Ana sends word, he hears word about these 113 men, and he says, kill them all. And the people there at Saltillo, this shows you how much power the centralized government of Mexico had over the rest of Mexico, which was really almost nil. Because there in Saltillo, they said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to kill them all. Because they didn't agree with Goliad. They didn't agree with the things that had gone up here. So instead, Santa Ana commands that they have a diezimo, which is from Roman times a way to kill 10% of the people and not the whole group. And that in itself is a torture because you, the survivor, have horrible remorse and guilt over the ones that died. So they're made to line up and draw black or white beans. So if you got a black bean, what happened? Muerto. And so the white bean guys, they're like, dig deep. They all had their strategy for finding the white bean. So they're all, the sad remainder, about 13 of them were lined up, 17, were lined up and shot while the others were made to watch. And in fact, it was a scene so disturbing to the Mexican soldiers that you can see here in Thomas Green's depiction. He was there at the scene. The guys were fainting, and they were devastated themselves at seeing, what was going on, and that everybody was made to watch. So it was a terrible thing, and shock and awe. And the rest of them were put into the jail again, and Jeffrey is badly injured, so the father sends out for wine for his son. So this sketch, actually, it's in the T.J. Green story, but it was done by Charles McLaughlin, who was one of the one of the ones that was allowed to go free. So back in Mexico City, Santa Anna had learned that the boys, including a guy named Orlando Phelps, had arrived, and the American consul to Mexico City, his name was Waddy Armstrong, was trying to appeal for the boys' release and the release of the Texans. And he allows Orlando Phelps to go. His father, a lot of people don't know this, but on the San Jacinto battlefield, after he's captured, Sam Houston sends him to go on a boat upon his capture. He drinks so much laudanum to try to kill himself that a man who was here at San Jacinto named Phelps, Dr. Phelps, pumped his stomach and saved his life. And Orlando was his son. So he allows Orlando, who's older, he's probably about 17, to go free. And so Thompson goes to negotiate, Waddy Thompson goes to the Zócalo to negotiate with Santa Anna for the release of the boys and the soldiers. When John C.C. Hill met Santa Anna, the president was sitting in his quarters dressed plainly. John recalled, he was a rather handsome man. He was not tall, being only 5 feet 5 inches in height. He wore his hair combed forward. One would hardly take him for a dictator or a tyrant. So, interestingly, he's building bridges even at a young age, which later would prove him well. So he says, now we will settle about young Hill. And he's saying this to his minister of war, Jose Maria Tornel was his name. And he ran the war college, and he also ran the mining college. So the two were just developing. And he said, now I want to settle this matter about young Hill. I want to adopt this boy and make a soldier out of him. And John blurted out, Your Excellency, I can't be your son. I have a good father, and I can't be a soldier in your country because I'm a Texan. And then Santa Anna turns to Tornel and says, our prisoner dictates terms. After some discussion whether to send the boy to the military academy of the government or the College of Mining, Tornel suggested the mining school or the Colegio de Minería would be the better choice for the boy. He was a smart guy. And here is Tornel. And that was a very smart decision on their part. I think it would have been a disaster to force the boy. He would have left. And they wanted to keep him. And I think they wanted to keep him as sort of a football that he's throwing back to Texas, saying, I'm just going to keep this kid. And so he enters the school. Oh, here's the Palacio Nacional where they met. And that is where Santa Anna was living. Maximilian later would reject this place as too much of a dump. So he enrolls in the School of Mining, which was a really impressive building. And he begins to learn Spanish terms for mining. And at the time, the English were very much in Mexico trying to get the mining contracts for lead, gold, silver. And with that, they come in and build railroads and bridges and ways to get the gold out. As you know, or maybe you don't know, but Mexican silver was considered the purest in the world. Even better, so much so that like the Indians in India, when anybody would go buy cotton from them, they were buying mostly from Texas, but when they purchased from India, the Indians demanded Mexican silver. They knew that much more about the assaying process. So part and parcel, he's learning about negotiations with the English, and it was very useful to them, to the Mexicans, that he was bilingual. And in fact, by the time people would go visit him, just a few years later, he was already forgetting English. And he would have to say, for like a church would be where the people kneel. I mean, he couldn't remember certain terms. So he ends up working for the government for quite a number of years, and he returns in 1844. This man named Albert Gilliam toured Mexico, and he was setting out to be in the mining business, and he says, he met through Tornell, met Hill, and he said, Gilliam says, I could not remark the pleasure of the young man took in showing us everything worthy of notice. It was with pain to us and some confusion to himself. He was forgetting us from room to room. It was observable that he was forgetting his native tongue by being often very much in want of English words to express himself. On such occasions, he would supply the deficiency by the use of Spanish. So the school was a fabulous place to learn. It had the Humboldt Observatory. I don't know if you've ever read the travels of Humboldt, who came through Mexico and taught them even how to do observatories. He was a worldwide astronomer and naturalist. So he ends up for a number of years in Mexico until he decides, after the Mexican War is over and he's completed his doctorate, he decides to write to his mother and say he wants to marry. So he goes back to Texas and asked for permission to marry, and he married the daughter. Her name was Agustina Sagredo. She was the daughter of a general in Mexico. And after she dies, he comes back to Austin to be the translator for the Texas Land Office in Austin. But he didn't like it, and he said, I can't work in the close confines of that office. So he went back to Mexico. And here's his family at the end. He asked another woman to marry him, a woman who he had fallen in love with as a child near Houston. And the woman had moved to Los Angeles, and she turned him down. So at first she said yes, and then she said no. But anyway, this is his family in about 1900. And it's just a really, really wonderful story. People have approached me about making it into a screenplay and a movie. It's just a really cool story if you imagine a fish out of water story. And it's one that I think very well illustrates that 9-year segue. I mean, we didn't just end up with the Alamo, San Jacinto boom into statehood. It didn't happen quite that way. A lot of people lost their lives, a lot of misunderstandings over who was in control.